think it's about time I got on with painting this Stormwing model, just so I can get the High Elves army finished, or at least the kind of initial 1,000 points based on the 4th edition box set. I've been putting this off for a wee while now. I'm not sure why. I think it's because it's a slightly bigger size model. It's fully metal, so it's a bit heavier and more clunky to hold and deal with. The plan with it is to do the colour scheme as per the army book, and I'm just thinking of ways to make it a bit easier to paint or more efficient. I think in the original colour scheme, the painter was using, I think it might be Mike McVeigh, but the painter was using dry brushing techniques on the feathers. You can see that's the case, and it would be sensible to do it that way. Yeah, there's quite a few different painting techniques going on there. There's the animal print, which I assume is a leopard print scheme. Then the eagle wings and the feathers, the two tones, the two colours. So quite a few things to do here. But it's a great design, it's a great paint job on that. And I'll try and do something similar. One of the things I've done to help me with getting to grips with the colours from the various paints I've bought, especially these contrast paints, and also the shades down here as well, but it's just put together a kind of a board here using Victoria Miniatures bottle toppers, I think they call them. These are resin printed little shapes that can be fitted on the top of your Citadel paint bottles, and they work well for that, but I wanted to see them all out together for comparison's sake, and it just gives me something to refer back to when I want to see what a colour looks like. Just paint it directly onto a white primer base. And I'm going to aim to make use of probably one or two of these different contrast paints or shades in doing the Stormwing model. But I do recommend this. It's actually been really helpful having them just as a colour chart or a reference for choosing the right tone for what you're doing. So okay, I've made a start with the dark feathers, and this is XV88 that I'm using. I was working out a couple of recipes, just using my guide that I showed you, and I found that the dark feathers, at least, I can get something close to it with XV88 as a base coat, and then Agrax Earthshade over that to get the dark brown look. It then needs a bit of dry brushing with 2 or 3 colours to pick up on some of the colours shown in the army book. So I think that's the thing with contrast paints and shades, and you can use them however you want. You don't have to necessarily use them how they are intended to be used. You can use them on top of other colours. Those contrast paints can be used on top of anything you want, really. There's no reason not to try it. And yeah, I'm starting with the darker feathers. Don't know if it would have made more sense to start with the light ones, but I thought that the darker ones are going to be a bit messier, or maybe harder to clean up, especially with the dry brushing. I'm almost thinking of completing the dark feathers and then moving on to the light ones, but I'll see. Might be better just to do all the base colours as normal and build up from there. Can at least tidy up the edges. I'm going to try and be as neat as I can, but I think inevitably this one's going to need quite a bit of correcting and fixing mistakes, just in terms of getting around all the feathers with the 2 different colours. You can already tell the scheme is going to be nice. You know, it is a striking way to paint these feathers with the 2 tones. I've seen some other people painting them just all like one colour, and I think it'd be a shame to miss out on doing it in the original scheme. When you start painting the model, you appreciate what must have gone into the sculpting, and whether these feathers were all done one by one and then stuck together to form a wing or not, I don't know. In the catalogue at the back of the army book, it says designed by Trish Morrison and Jez Goodwin, so I presume Jez Goodwin did the Eltharion figure, I presume, and Trish Morrison did the Stormwing, because she's famous for the monsters and things. And I should say Trish Carden is her name, who sculpted this and other monsters. There's a really good interview on YouTube on the channel Film Deg Miniatures, with an interview with Trish Carden, and it was good to see that she's actually still modelling and sculpting monsters and other things. And I had no idea that she was sculpting some of the creatures on the Forge World website up until recently. I probably own a few that she's done. I didn't really know. I just got to remember this pattern of dark to light. I'm hoping to get away with one pass with this XV88. It is a base colour and it tends to go on pretty well when I use it. I tend to use it in a lot of models in some way, and it does cover well, because I don't really want to be doing multiple coats on a model this big, if I can avoid it at least. Okay, just about there with the left wing. So once this is done, I'm just going to go right on and do the other one. I'm just constantly referencing across to the photography in the army book to try and help guide me a little bit on where the different coloured feathers are going to be. I do want to try and get it close if I can, certainly for the colour, if not the quality of it, but it's quite tricky doing it. Because if I'm being honest, I'm not that sure that the sculpt, the model here, is exactly the same as the one in the army books. Now, whether that is because the one in the army book was an earlier prototype, or maybe a model still under a bit of development. But once you start trying to pick out the same feathers or little spots of detail, it's quite hard to match them up entirely, which is probably a sign that I shouldn't worry about it too much. I still need to work out what the overall strategy is going to be for dealing with 2 different tones in the feathers and how to approach that. Do you complete all the brown feathers fully, a bit of dry brushing perhaps, and then try and paint the lighter feathers where they go? Or do you base paint everything? Entirely sure yet. Again, I'm just referencing across to the images in the army book for this. The colourings up on the head. It's going to get tricky because you can't quite see everything, so we'll have to make up a lot of it. I think I'm also going to try and mimic the the odd brown feather here and there that's mixed in with the lighter sections as per that original. So I'm being quite rough with the paint at the moment. It's not very neat, but I'm hoping to come back and tidy it up. It's more about just getting the paint onto the model at the moment. I will come back with a smaller brush for the lighter colours to help tidy things up. Okay, so I think I'm just going to go for the idea of shading the dark feathers first, and then doing the dry brushing and things, and then I'll come back later and deal with the lighter feathers and areas. And I'm just going to use some Agrax Earthshade, and I've mixed it with a little bit of Lamian Medium just to thin it out a touch. And I'm looking to bring out the detail in those feathers and also provide a bit of a darker outline around the edge of them, which will give me something to work up to later when I'm doing the lighter ones. So whether this is the best way to do it or not, I guess I'll find out. I think in any case I'm going to end up doing quite a lot of tidying up work, no matter what method I use. So I may as well make it as easy as I can for one set of the feathers, and then deal with the other set next. Just a kind of one-to-one mix with the shade and the medium. It's always easier to darken it up. It needs to be quite dark around the eyes and the outline around the beak needs to be dark also. Doing it this way, I've just got to hope that painting the lighter feathers won't be too much of a problem, just in terms of being neat and not going on to the dark areas. Hoping that this method is going to work okay. Okay, so that's that pass of Agrax Earthshade on those darker feathers. Let that dry and then move on. Yeah, just before getting going, the next step in dry brushing, just having a quick check back with the original, and you can see those darker feathers, especially up here where there seems to be a bit of red in there, maybe in the dry brushing, before going up to a highlight, maybe a kind of beige colour or whatever. So that's the target. I've got the brown basically done now, which looks to be not far off, so we'll see what we can do with the dry brushing. So I've got some Tuscarora fur, which is quite a red tone. I've got my dry brush here, just put a small amount on the feathers. I'm not going to go daft with it because I don't want them getting too red, but there's a hint of it in that photography. Just got to be careful not to put on too much. Again, easier to put more on than take any off. Just making sure to rub plenty onto a paper towel first. And you can see how on those neighbouring feathers, really difficult to not get paint onto those. So I think that's why I'm preferring the idea of painting those separately and doing a tidy up after being a bit messy with this initial dry brushing steps. I'm also just going to go over the prominent edges of the feathers with a really watered down XV88, because they had gotten too dark with the Agrax Earthshade wash. So I'm just going to build up a bit of brightness on that leading edge, or the exposed edge of those feathers, rather than leaving them black or near it dark brown, because it would make sense for those to be lighter anyway, given how exposed they are. So just multiple quick layers. Moving further and further to the top. Some scrag brown now, kind of lighter than the last colour. Different dry brushes as well, just so I'm not using a freshly cleaned and still damp brush. This is a dry, this has not been used recently, so it's nice and dry. This will just help transition towards a kind of brighter flesh, creamy colour for the highlight. Hopefully the colours come out in the camera, because there is a subtle difference being made here that I can see. Just using some Deathclaw brown now, trying to catch the exposed edges. Then up to the tips of those upper feathers. In each case, I'm not trying to undo everything that was done in the previous pass. I'm hoping it all kind of builds towards a decent look. And then I've got some Tau light ochre for essentially the tips of the feathers. Don't need to use too much of this one. Really light dry brush with Ungor Flesh, just as the top highlight. Yeah, okay, I think that'll do it for those darker brown feathers now. I think there's enough dry brushing going on for that. Whether I needed every single step of that or not, I don't know. I think it all does make a difference. But one thing I can say is that I've made quite a mess of the white feathers. So it's just going to be a case of coming in with the white paint. This is White Scar, and reapplying white to the feathers that need it. So this could be a bit time consuming. I'm not going to go too close to the adjoining feather. Don't mind leaving a nice dark outline. But yeah, I've got quite a few of these to do, and the coverage with white isn't always that great in terms of getting rid of that reddy brown colours. I think if I just take my time and work through them and try and keep it neat will be the key. So as expected, the tricky thing is, well, there's two tricky things. One is holding it without bashing the wingtips off the desk and risking spoiling the paint, and having to hold it like this means it's wobblier than I would like. And the other problem is getting the coverage with the white paint. So unfortunately it's not going to be one pass. I'm going to have to go over it a couple of times, I think. But hopefully the second pass will be a bit easier if I can get into most of the kind of tricky points this first time. It's just that I can still see some of the colour from the previous dry brushing coming through in the white. So I'll keep holding my breath and carrying on with this. Okay, that's the white reinstated on the model. It was quite time consuming, to be honest, doing that, but yeah, I think that'll work for a basis for the next stage. So checking in with the original, you can see those lighter feathers, the kind of look that they've got. It's a bit of brown in the shading, maybe a little hint of orange or yellow. So that's what we're going to try and achieve now. Yeah, so I'm going to start with a mixture of shade paints. I'm going to base it on the Seraphim Sepia, and into that I'm going to add a small amount of the Fugan Orange just to warm up the colour a bit more. But I'm also going to cut it with some of the contrast medium. So this is going to be a bit of contrast being used to change the way that the shades are going to work. Without the contrast, I think the shades will coat the white all over, they'll leave their mark. But with a bit of contrast added, what I'm hoping is that the paint will come away more from the raised areas, leaving a bit more white showing, and it will settle down into the grooves and the details in the feathers. Okay, so I've got my mix now. Hopefully I've got enough to get the miniature all done. I did actually add a little touch of Casandora yellow into that mix also. And like I said, there's plenty of the contrast medium in there. So I'm going to paint it on and try and do it neatly. I'm not going to go over the brown or the darker feathers. I'm going to just try and centre it, or focus it on the light feathers where I can. If you go over the edge, it's not a big deal. But I'm hoping that with that contrast medium in the mix, that this colour will pull back a bit from the raised areas as it dries. I'm not going to go on too heavy with it either. I don't want it really pooling too much. I quite like it so far. As it dries it may change, but I did use my test card that I showed you at the start of the video with one of the spare little test pieces and tried this on it, and it seemed to look okay. The temptation with the shade paints and contrast paints is to put lots on, and that might be okay in other situations, but I think here you need to be careful not to use too much. And I'm going to do this quite methodically. I'm not just trying to paint everything all in one go. I'm trying to do one feather at a time, just to try and keep control of it, if anything. I think it may still need a white dry brush, maybe on the ends of the feathers, for these lighter feathers anyway. Getting to the end now. I've mixed up far too much, but I thought it'd be better to have too much of it than be needing to mix up more if I ran out. But I'll be able to keep this stuff, might be useful for something else. And then lastly, up on the top of the head, I think up in here might be where I would add a bit of a white dry brush. But we'll see how it looks. Right now I'm just wanting to make sure I get something onto all the white parts. Catch any little air bubbles that were left. Okay, so I'm going to let this dry properly, and then I'll come back and check on it later and see how it looks. And just in terms of saving this paint, these little jars are useful. just rather than wasting that mix, I can keep it for something else. So that's the result once that wash had dried. It's maybe a touch too yellow or orange. It's not bad, but what I'm doing at the moment is coming in with some white paint for a little bit of a dry brush. And I really have to be quite careful now. I just want to see if I can get some white onto the edges up here on the wings, because what I really don't want to do is get any on the darker brown feathers. So I'm using a just kind of firm flat brush type, just letting that run across. I might do this a few times from different angles just to try and help keep it neat, because I like the general tone of it, and I don't really want to change too much, but it does need a little bit of white now, dry brushed, to catch the edges. So I'll work around this, and hopefully it will just finish it off nicely. Just as a final step, I've mixed up very thin red-brown wash, just some scrag brown with plenty of water in it. And for these darker feathers, I'm just putting some of this on the lower side of each feather, just to bring out a bit more of an orangey red in those darker ones, because I can make it out in the photography that there is something in the feathers. Don't need it to be too prominent. It's just as a kind of glaze, really. And I'll do this on both sides. Okay, so final reminder of what the feathers were like in the original, what I'm aiming for. And then that's the one that I've painted just now. So I think it's reasonably close colour-wise. So yeah, it's taken a wee while to do. I think the method of doing the dark feathers first and then having to tidy up all the light feathers, I think that was the kind of slowest part of the paint scheme. But in general, I'm happy with the end result, which is the main thing. So I mean, hopefully there's been something useful in the video for you. The next video, we're going to tackle the animal print design for the lower torso and see how that goes. But in the meantime, thanks very much.